Welcome to The Micro Collector, a podcast where I talk with the founders and operators behind some of the most exciting microbrands and independent watch companies. I'm your host, Justin Dorfman, and in today's episode, I'm joined by YK, founder of Feynman Timekeepers, one of the most distinctive independent watch brands coming out of Singapore. In this conversation, we talk about YK's journey from collector to founder, the inspiration behind Feynman, and the stories behind watches like the Feynman 1 and Feynman Q. We also dive into why Singapore has become such a hotbed for microbrands, and YK's own role as one of the strongest advocates for independent watch brands through initiatives like Sprung, and his work at Big Time Singapore. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe for more conversations with the people behind these incredible watch brands. And with that, please enjoy my conversation with YK of Feynman Timekeepers. All right, YK, welcome to the Micro Collector podcast. I'm super excited to have you on today.
Thank you for inviting me to the podcast. Yeah, I'm also quite honored to be one of the interviewers to be on the podcast. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen floating around Instagram a graphic that says that Singapore is the number one country in the world when it comes to microbrands.
Yeah, I think it just came out a few days ago.
Right. And when I've asked a couple microbrand founders about Singapore and the microbrand ecosystem, your name, your brand, but also all the things that you're doing with Sprung and with Big Time came up. So I wanted to reach out to you and invite you on the podcast and hear a little bit more about the magic that you have going on there in Singapore.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, feel free to ask me anything that you're curious about.
Yeah, well, I guess to start, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into watches? Maybe more personally, I did a little bit of research before this, and I saw that on your website, you mentioned that you were a collector before you were a microbrand founder. So maybe you can tell us a little about your journey into watches and becoming passionate about watches.
So basically, it all started from many years ago. I think that's almost like 12 to 15 years ago. So at the point of time, I was still working in the IT industry. So I was kind of like, it was a milestone for me. I have worked very hard for 5 years and got promoted. So I was actually kind of like looking for a watch. So that's where the watches thing came about, right? So of course, for the first thing, right, as a non-watch collector, the first thing you think of is let's get a Rolex, things like that. So at the point of time, there was no social media. There were only like watch forums. So that's how I got into watches, basically. So I went into this Singapore Rolex Owners Club forum. So I went inside thinking that, this is my first watch. It should be something meaningful. So I wanted to do some research. But somehow, after I got my first watch, I realized that actually the watch world is very big. It's not just about one brand, there's so many different brands that is very interesting with history and background. So that's how I started loving watches. And then, of course, it's the rabbit hole, right? So we all get into it. And then we started to look at more brands and started to buy more watches. So along the way, about like in 2016 to 17, around that period, because I had a kid, right? So I was thinking that, should I create something or maybe get a special watch for him, right? So that was my first point. And then it came about to me that when I was looking around, I find that most of the watches that I've seen are pretty kind of mainstream, right? So in a way that is nice, it's good, but it's not that kind of special thing that I'm looking at. So I came across this friend who happens to be one of the microbrand owners, sellers, Elshan. So basically, I spoke to him and he said that it's not that difficult to create a microbrand. You should try it out. Things like that. But I think he lied to me because it's very difficult. After I started, I realized that, right? So fast forward things. So I went around like looking for contractors, and then I created my own design, and that's where in 2018 we launched Feynman Timekeepers. So the meaning behind Feynman Timekeepers obviously is quite straightforward. Feynman is my firstborn, so I named the entire brand after him. So instead of the initial idea of creating a piece unique watch for him, I ended up creating an entire brand with his name. So it's like my hope is to kind of like leave a small little legacy to him. So when he grows up, he will be like kind of proud that, oh, I actually have a watch brand that is named after me. And hopefully he can continue the brand when he grows up.
Such a cool story, and very cool to hear that you and Elshin connected in the early days, because I know he has built a brand that really has put Singapore on the scene, right?
He's one of the biggest micro brands in Singapore. And I think a lot of brand owners also kind of like look at him, and what he has done is really great in the micro brand industry. Yeah. And he's still going very strong now.
I actually have a Zelos watch on my wrist
Nice.
right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. Actually the Zelos was my first micro brand also. The first micro brand watch that I bought. Yeah.
I think this was my second. So my first one, I'm based in the US. So the
Mm-hmm.
first one I heard of was Brew. And that was my
I see.
first one, the Brew metric. And this was my second one. And yeah, the other part of this story around, your son, the inspiration and passing something on to him, more than even just a watch, but a brand and a legacy is really, really interesting. Tell me about that first watch. So I think it was the Feynman 1, right?
Yes.
Where did the idea for the design come from? And maybe what were some of the challenges that you experienced bringing your first watch to market? And I guess one last question is, did you have any other attempts before the Feynman 1 where you sort of assembled your own watches or learned how to build watches or anything like that? Or was it really that your first attempt to bring something to the market?
So for me, I do not have a design background. So it's kind of like, as a watch collector, based on my 10 over years of collecting experience, what I would like to see in a watch that currently doesn't, is not in my collection, right? So that's where I came out with the Feynman 1, something like off-center kind of sub-seconds, which generally people will put the sub-seconds at 6. But I wanted something really kind of eye-catching and different. And of course, the lizard tail. Lizard tail is another long story. The lizard tail has been in all our watches since day one until now, right? Every single model. So a lizard tail story actually came because at a point of time, my son was really young. And I thought that since it's a watch that is designed for him, I should incorporate something that he likes into the watch. So at the point of time, it was very interesting because at his age, right, he kind of loves lizards toys, those rubber lizard toys, that we get from the supermarket and stuff. And every time that we pass by, he would want to get one and then one. And then subsequently, he has a lot of them and he was like enjoying playing with so-called toy lizards. So that's where I got the idea that actually we can incorporate something like the lizard tail into the watch. And because it's a sub-second watch, right? So basically the lizard tail actually symbolizes that even though the lizard tail has broken off from the body, which is the hour and minute hand, but it still moves, right? It has a life of its own. That's where the entire story came about. So I find it that it's quite interesting and it really relates to the life of a real lizard. And subsequently, we incorporate things like lizard skin leather strap, which is fully handcrafted by E-Leather, one of our good friends who has been supporting us since day one. So we incorporate things like that. And of course, it's not so sales moving as what you see, right, as a brand. So we had to run around a lot of places trying to get factories to agree to make our watches because we are a new brand. So we have no history and of course our MOQ at that point in time was slow, right? Because it's the first brand. And the interesting part is that even though a lot of people advise me not to, but I actually produced the watches before we launched it on Kickstarter. So we actually made the payment and produced the watches using my own savings because I really feel that only with that kind of determination and a little bit of pressure, then we will succeed, right? So if I were to depend solely just on Kickstarter, it's kind of like, I'm depending on the success of Kickstarter before I have confidence in my own brand. So I was I'm not sure if it's overconfident. I produced all the watches for the first batch even before we started Kickstarter. So that's where one of the challenges also, because financially is quite a heavy burden on us. And I use up most of my savings just to produce the watch at the point of time. And also the other thing would be being a very new brand. We actually price our watches at a quite high value compared to the microbrand industry at the point of time, right? The reason behind it is not because we wanted to price it very high, but because at the point of time we were using very expensive materials and movements. Like we were one of the first in Singapore to use the ETA 7001 movement. So at the point of time, I was kind of like putting myself as a customer's shoes. What kind of movement do I like? And I wanted a really good movement that I feel that is very robust and doesn't require much servicing. And also at the same point of time, it must be serviceable in any country, because microbrands, we deliver to all the countries, right? And one of the main issues with microbrand as a collector I face is servicing. If I have a very sophisticated movement which is very hard to service, I will have to send it back to the brand owner every time, right? So one of the reasons why we choose the ETA movement is that we know that it can be serviced in any country and the spare parts are easily available. Yeah, so because of that, we ended up having a very high cost. So our first launch, if I remember, my pricing was about 900 Singapore dollars for a first watch for the first brand, without any customers, and without any marketing. So at that point of time, I believe Microbrands were selling at about 300 to 500 Singapore dollars, and we were the first one to go like 900, close to 1,000, and our retail price was about 1,002. So it was very high. And one joke which I always share with my customers and friends, right, is that when I got my first prototype, I showed it to my mom. That's my first person I showed it to, right? So I showed it to my mom, and her reaction was like, "Are you crazy? You're selling a watch that nobody knows at $1,200. Are you sure this is the right thing to do?" So that was kind of like internal joke between me and my mom, because today when I show her my watches, like the new release, like the V, the Q, and everything, she's always smiling and say that, "Oh, why are you selling so cheap?" It's kind of like a very happy thing lah for me, because to get the recognition from my own mom also now today, that she's actually proud that we really did it. And to this year is the 8th year that we're running the brand, which time flies. Yeah. So yeah. So those are the kind of challenges that we face lah, basically. Yeah.
What's interesting is I know you probably think of these things, some of these things as maybe mistakes or a lack of sort of experience early on, but actually I think in a sense you did some things that were really benefits for your customers. For instance, the fact that you produced the watches beforehand probably meant that they didn't have that wait time that a lot of these Kickstarter campaigns have, right? You pre-order and then you have to wait 6 months till the watches are in your hands. And then on the other side, with the high pricing, probably was really good validation, right? If people are actually buying at that price point, that gives you a real sense of confidence that as you scale, as you're able to lower that price point, you're going to be able to sell, a lot more watches. So those things were actually probably, looking back at them, blessings in disguise, if you will, because they really set you on the right path with your watches.
Looking back, some of the decisions that we made at the point of time, like for example, when I talk about cost, right? Why our cost is so high is because every single Feynman watch, we handmade the leather straps. So we don't order straps from the factory. We insisted of having E-Leather, which is our leather strap partner, to handmade every single strap. So she is only just one person. So she has to make hundreds of straps for me. And so at the point of time, I was very grateful to her also for accepting this challenge. And she has been doing it for 8 years now, unknowingly, right? So it's pretty tough because, as you know, right, handmade straps are very different. So as I mentioned, I started the brand from a collector's background. So one of the things that I'm very particular about watches is the strap itself, because most of the watches that I buy off the shelf, right, I'm generally unhappy with the straps that came with the watch. So that's also how I got to know Shui from E-Leather, because every single customized leather strap from my own watches is done by her. Because I'm always unhappy with something when the watches come. I'll say, hey, I need to get a new strap. Can you make me something that like kind of suits the watch? Because I feel that if we are selling a very expensive watch, at that point of time, to me, I like a $800 watch, right? It needs to have a very good strap, to match the watch. I can't be giving you a subpar, come like factory made straps, which is $10 for a $800 watch. I feel that it's kind of doesn't match the theme of the brand and the entire watch. It's kind of, to me, it's like I'm disrespecting the watch by putting a very cheap strap onto the product that I'm very proud of. So that is why we have been very insistent on using handmade straps lah. Yeah, so of course that is also one of the challenge, because I believe as a watch collector, you understand, right? It's very hard for us to explain to the customers why the price is high because of the leather strap also. Because a single piece of custom leather strap easily costs you $100, right? So every single watch comes with that strap. And some of them we use exotic leather, like the lizard leather, which has cost us close to almost $150 to $200 per strap. So that adds on to the price of the watch. But as a watch collector, I realized that most of them, they actually don't realize how good a strap that they are receiving together with the watch itself, right? If you minus off the cost of the strap, the watch is actually quite reasonable, I would say. Yeah. So that's where the entire challenge of explaining to every single customer that talks to us is important to me, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually having this conversation with a friend, a fellow collector recently, and we were talking about how straps are a real missed opportunity for microbrands. There's a lot of now really innovative stuff happening in straps and bracelets and things like that. So I love seeing it. But traditionally, as a collector, most of us would get our watch and then immediately change the strap on it, right? And it was a huge missed opportunity, I felt, because on the other side of the coin, I would see all these microbrands investing in amazing packaging, like these beautiful boxes and things like that. And by the way, I love great packaging better, as much as the next collector. But usually the box is something that I am going to experience once, right? It's like I open it, it's a great initial experience, and then I put it in my watch box with all my other watches, and that box goes into my closet and I never use it again, right? And yet the strap is something that I'm using every single day, and it really has an impact on the comfort, but also on the enjoyment of the watch. And yet most microbrands don't spend money on the strap, they're spending money on the packaging. So I'm 100% with you on the value there. And I can also see how it could be a little difficult to educate the market on that just because they're not used to it, right?
Because it's kind of like, I feel that it has always been a challenge for micro brands in terms of explaining to customers how the costing works, right? Because to be very honest, like to make business sense, right? If you were to get a strap from the factory and package it with a watch, it costs you maybe at most, let's say $10 compared to a custom leather strap, which is 10 times the cost, about $100, right? So you can see that it actually doesn't make any business sense, right? To have something that is 10 times the cost. So that's why I think that's where we need to do a lot of education to the customers and the collectors about how serious we are about our product, right? So I'm not saying that it's bad putting on a factory strap on the watch, because some watches are really not that expensive. So it doesn't really make sense to have a strap that is almost half the price of the watch. But for us, because our watches are slightly higher price, closer to the above $1,000 range, we feel that it is only decent for us to like 10% to 15% of the cost of the watch into the strap. I think it makes sense that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting. I love that differentiation and how you're thinking about it. We talked about the Feynman one, your first watch. Now, a couple years later, you have many different lines in your collection. Maybe give us a high level overview of the various ones. And I'll tell you the first one that I saw that really caught my eye. I mentioned that before we hit record here that I went to the Watchrobe and I saw the Feynman Q in there. And I was just really interested in the case shape. And I saw the lizard hand, second hand on that watch. And I was very excited when I went on your website and I looked at all the different watches and saw that consistency in the lizard hand across it. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about the full collection and what you have in there.
So maybe a quick run through. So basically for Feynman, we have two lines of products, right, to differentiate. We have the so-called the artistic crafts product, which we generally do in very limited pieces, not more than 10, right? Those are our higher artisan projects where we collaborate with Singapore artists to do. So like for example, in 2020 and 2021, we actually submitted our projects to GPHG. And then last year we are very lucky we got nominated for the Timepiece Awards last year for our enamel watch. Although we didn't win, but we feel that it's already a win getting nominated, right? So these are artistic crafts watches, mainly are made of enamel dials. So we use pure silver enamel dials, and we have our own master enamelist in Singapore to help us to do it. So basically, this is our collaboration. We call it collaboration projects, Project Collace. So Project Collace actually incorporates different Singaporeans to work on a single watch. So for example, the Collace Lotus or the Panda, there are actually 5 different people working on a single watch. We have a Singaporean watchmaker, we have myself as a designer, we have the master enamelist, we have the strap maker, and then we have the watchmaker who assembles the watch. So everyone is in Singapore. We have to sit down together to discuss and then work on a single project. So that's our Collace project series. And usually we launch about one series a year with limited pieces as mentioned. Then we have our mainstream collection, because I still feel that we want to stay connected to the main audience, which is our majority audience. So our mainstream collection started from the Feynman 1 in 2018, right? Subsequently, after the Feynman 1, as a natural progression, I think for a brand, right? Just a little bit of rewind, because at the point when I launched Feynman 1, right, as mentioned, I produced everything, but the sales was not good, right? Because we are a very new brand and we do not do enough marketing as a new brand at the point of time. We are still in the learning process. So on the second watch, as a natural progression, we decided that, maybe we should do a diver, right? Because diver, as you know, is very popular in the Microbrand industry. But we decided to do a very different kind of diver, which is the Feynman Cove, the next year. And we were kind of like really taken aback about the response of Feynman Cove, because it was like, if I remember correctly, I was just sitting down in front of the laptop launching the campaign on Kickstarter, and we hit $80,000 in like the few hours. So I was like really shocked at the point of time. That was before COVID, right before COVID. I still remember. And then we were like, now I have confidence, right? Because the first project didn't do too well. The confidence level and the morale is pretty low. And of course, I invested a lot of money there. And then we have the Cove, and then suddenly, the confidence came back. We know that, actually, there are people who really like our watches, and we just actually really need to find the right group audience to like our watches. So after the Cove, which was highly successful, and we actually sold out everything within like a few months, then we proceeded to launch the field watch, which is the Feynman Fjord. Right. So for the Feynman Fjord, it is similar to the Cove, but instead of a diver bezel, we are actually incorporating a kind of a compass bezel inside. We launched the Fjord, and after the Fjord, subsequently, because it's almost 5 years of Feynman, and then we decided to relaunch the Feynman 1, because it's kind of like I'm not sure if it's something that I can tell aspiring brand owners who wanted to start a brand. So the interesting part is that if your first watch doesn't sell, it doesn't mean that it's not successful. It just means that maybe you have not hit the right audience group, or people do not know about your brand. So the interesting part was that when we launched the Cove and the Fjord, we started selling out a lot of Feynman ones. So we ended up selling out all the Feynman ones, and then we kind of like regret, we should have did more Feynman 1 because there were so much demand for the Feynman 1 at the point of time when the Cove and the Fjord was launched. So it kind of like maybe could be a learning experience for us. Like, it's just the right time that people know about your brand. Then they will appreciate maybe your previous designs. So it doesn't mean that they will come back, I feel. So at that point of time, we decided to relaunch the Feynman 1 because we have sold out everything long ago and there was so much request asking us that, can you launch another Feynman 1 dress watch? So we actually redesigned the entire new Feynman 1 case into the teardrop case, which is inspired by a restaurant. So we launched the Feynman 1 and again, we were too conservative. We didn't do a lot of them and we kind of like sold out everything pretty fast for the Feynman 1. So I was kind of say that maybe it's just a coincidence or maybe it's just fate that, the first watch that started the entire brand ends up always becoming the best-selling watch. So we sold out the Feynman 1 V2. So in fact, we are actually looking at the V3 now. We're studying the design of V3 now, which will take some time. Then then after that, we decided that, okay, enough of mainstream kind of round case design. Let's do something very different, right? So that's where we started looking at the vintage watches that I liked. Then we came across this Omega TV case watch. It's a Constellation TV case. Then I was like thinking, maybe we should do a square watch, right? So that's how the idea for the Feynman 6 came about. So we launched the Feynman 6 in the 6 years of our business. So that's 2024. So we launched it with as the thinnest Feynman watch that we have launched. So it was only about 8.6 in thickness for a full bracelet watch. And the bracelet, we took inspiration from the Omega Constellation, but we remodified the bracelet to kind of like a modern dimension to suit the thin case because the original Omega was a very thick watch. So the bracelet kind of like doesn't really suit. But because it's a vintage design, so people are okay with that. But as we know now, we are in the modern era, right? So it's a little bit different in terms of designing bracelet. So we redesigned the entire dimension of the whole bracelet. In fact, the bracelet took longer to produce than the watch itself. So because the entire bracelet was only 2.6 thickness. So it's a very thin, solid link bracelet. It's not hollow. So it's a solid link bracelet and it tapers from 24 to 16. So it's a very strong taper and a very kind of like what the factory says, it's a very strange design. They were asking me that, can you change your design? Because it's difficult for them to do, right? But I insisted and saying that it's okay if it take longer, but I really want it to be there. So we ended up launching the Feynman 6 and then subsequently after the 6, right, we were thinking that what's next, right? Because we have launched round watches, we have launched diver watches, then we have relaunched the Feynman 1 again, and then we have launched square watches. Subsequently, we were thinking like, again, because for me, right, I'm not a designer. I have to be very honest, I'm not a designer. So whenever I try to draw something, I have to get inspiration from somewhere. So where my inspiration comes from generally is from the watches that I like. Either I own them or I saw them online, which I feel that is a very great design, especially vintage watches. So as you can see, right, the Feynman Q, right, the entire case was inspired by the Roger Dubuis Sympathy case. So at the point of time, I came across this case shape. I thought that it was a really, really kind of unique case shape, and the conversation started, right. And of course, being a Sympathy, it was a very famous watch. And how do we make it very different from a Sympathy, right? So the first thing would be, of course, where do we incorporate the lizard tail and things like that? And what kind of movement we should be using. So at the point of time, I thought that I wanted to throw myself a challenge. What if we design a very simple watch with a quartz movement? Because I have never done any quartz watches before, and I'm sure that there is some stereotyping of quartz watches in the watch industry, right? Some people really don't prefer to have a quartz. Whenever they hear about a quartz movement, they'll immediately say no, no matter what the design is, right? But I just wanted to create a challenge for myself to see whether are the modern generation watch collectors ready to accept quartz watches. And of course, we wanted something very simple. That's where I thought of having no indices on the dial. But because there's no indices on the dial, the entire dial looks very plain, right? So when it looks very plain, it's kind of like something is missing. So that's where we started going back to the old Piagets that I like, right? So I love Piagets, especially the vintage, the tin Piagets with the stone dial. So I was looking at them and say that Piaget did very well in this design category and they are really very, very nice. So why not we try with stone dials? So that's where the entire concept of the Q came from. And of course, Q actually stands for quartz and also quirky at the same time, right? Because we wanted something very, very quirky to catch the attention because it cannot just be another quartz watch, right? Because there's tons of quartz watch and there's tons of stone dials in the market, right? So that's where the hands come in. So in fact, the hands was the most difficult to design because for the longest time, I had no idea what kind of hands I should use for a watch, right? So it just came through my mind during one day that my second son, Farron, so he is about at the point of time about 4 years old. So he was like learning shapes at the point of time. So one day when he came home, he was like showing me, Papa, diamond. So he was like, he learned a new shape. He was very excited, right? So he started to keep repeating the diamond. So I was thinking that, oh, diamond, maybe we can incorporate something with a diamond into the watch. So that's how we came out with the Feynman Q. So if you notice, the Feynman Q has a very weird, some people call it like snaky hands or something, right?
Yeah.
But the hands actually join together every hour to form 3 diamonds. So that's where the entire diamond shape came about. So if you were to put the hands, let's say at 12 o'clock, for example, right, you will see 3 diamonds form together. And you will only see 3 diamonds when the hands intersect with each other once an hour. So that's where the entire diamond inspiration came from. Yeah. So in fact for us, right, we always a lot of friends actually tell us that you need to tell this story to your collectors because they won't know, right? They won't know the story unless you tell it to them. Then I will say, yeah, that's why I've been going to events, talking to collectors and showing them the diamond hands, right? Hoping that they will pass on to tell the next person. So yeah, so that's the latest watch that we have, which is the Feynman Q, and I think that it is one of the most popular watches that we are selling today. So we actually did 3 rounds of reproduction already for the Feynman Q, which was pretty successful, which actually took me by surprise because I just wanted to test myself whether a quartz watch can work in the industry or not. Yeah.
Yeah, I love hearing the stories behind these watches, and your friends are totally right. I think collectors would really appreciate to hear all of this. The inspiration from your own, collecting and sort of enthusiasm around vintage watches and certain brands to your son, inspiring the diamond. These sort of things, are so special to hear behind the watches. So I could talk about that stuff for hours, but one thing that I did want to make sure that I asked you about is your involvement in really pushing Singapore as a microbrand center, right? And you talked a little bit about this, displaying the craftsmanship and the artistry of those that you're collaborating with, not just the dial sort of enamel experts, but also the strap partners that you work with and all kinds of people that you're collaborating with. But even beyond that, big time, your sort of distribution efforts and helping other microbrands get exposure, get into stores. And then also Sprung, which I have to say, in the conversations that I'm having, it's the event that comes up the most, right? People are so excited about that event. And it's not just people based in Asia, conversations with people in the UK and in the US and Canada. And, this is the event that comes up more and more. So the question I have is, when did that happen, right? So you're building your own brand. When did you think, you know what, beyond building my own brand, I want to help other microbrand founders and specifically Singaporean ones? And Which came first, Spring, Sprang, Sprung, or Big Time, and how did that sort of unfold?
So Sprang actually happened. I can say that it's kind of like a impromptu kind of impulse thing, right? So my co-founder, which is Sugi, and one of our partners, Wan Yu, which is a very famous photographer for watches. So we actually came about the first discussion was between me and Sugi. Sugi is the owner of Red Army Watches, right? So he is also a watch distributor and a watch retailer. So we actually kind of like was casually having lunch, like a catch up, because we are good friends, right? So we were kind of like casually having lunch and catching up, and then we were talking about just different watch fairs like Wine and things like that, because we saw that the response was very good, and then we just happened to think that, hey, we have so many micro brands in Singapore, but yet we don't have a micro brand fair, a smaller scale of wind up and things like that, right? Because for us, right, we are actually at the advantage because of our small geographical scale, right? So it's very easy for us to connect all the Singapore micro brands owners together because we are so near, right? We are like 5-10 minutes from each other's house and things like that. So we thought that why not we create a real kind of like a Singapore watch fair whereby we can help the micro brands to promote, because both myself and Sugi, we are very big advocates of micro brands. Like Red Army Watches actually carries also a lot of micro brands in their shops, right? So we kind of like love to help, and also we love these small little brands because of their creativity and the way they do things, right? So it's very different. So we just like kind of say, let's try to get 30 friends, because we know all of them, right? The brand owners, right? We either carry their product or we are friends with them. So we just tell each other, why not? Let's just try to get 30 brand owners. We sit down and do it like, like a casual flea market kind of style, We just do it for fun, right? We didn't even have the intention of making it a fair. We just thought that it was fun, right? Together, all the brand owners together, and then, create a big, like a GTG kind of a gathering. So, and then it somehow like we talk about it in, if I remember correctly, in somewhere in October or something. No, in August or September. And then we created this fair in October, 1 month later, straight off the bat. We were just like calling everyone within that month, and then we were calling suppliers to rent tables, things like that. And then we just managed to get 30 brands. Then we just say, let's go, let's do it, right? So all the 30 brands just came in and then bring all their watches, and then they send invites through their newsletter to invite all their customers to come to the fair. It's a 3 days fair, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the response was crazy. So we were like, wow, actually there are so many people, even for the first time we're organizing, and within a short notice period, within 1 month, we actually hit more than 1,000 visitors for the first fair, right? Which I was quite surprised also, because we didn't expect so much people. So we kind of like run around, trying to get our friends, relatives to help for crowd control, things like that, because there were more people, right, than expected. So, but a lot of collectors are really helpful. They just volunteered, hey, do you need help? How can I help you? Things like that. So we got a lot of help from the entire community. So we find that it's a very vibrant community, the microbrand actually, right? In fact, it actually helps the entire watch community also, right? Building awareness for watches and talk more about this hobby. And on the first fair, we also did a few workshops where we invite collectors, we invite brand owners to talk about their experience, and we stream it live on Instagram and stuff. So we kind of like, just on impulse, we just did it like a flea market. And then we realized that it can be done better as we go along the years. So this year is our 5th year doing it. So as we go along the years, we got more and more brands. And of course, we don't just accept Singaporean brands, because as we grow, right, we wanted to have some diversity also. So we accepted brands from different countries across the region, even from the US. Like last year, we had SWC flying in all the way from US, things like that. And then we have like Strom all the way from Norway, right? So there's a lot of brands flying in, and we are very excited that, so everyone is so excited about the Singapore community. And at the same time, we are also very happy because we are all passionate watch collectors, business aside. So we are really happy that we can meet all our friends in one place in just 2 days, where usually, our daily lives, right? I hardly get to meet my friends, even like once every year. We hardly get to meet. But this is an event whereby everyone really drop all their work, find time to attend and come together. So I feel that it's really not just only about watches, it's also about friendships, relationships, and also about the entire community that we have. So as we go along, of course, we got more and more excited, and we got more and more people to help us. So we are able to grow the fair. So as of the first fair, we had 30, right? I mentioned. So as of last year, we have 60, which is double. Yeah, and then this year we most likely will have more than 60 lah, based on the request that we see. Yeah, so that's how we started, based on impulse.
Interesting. Yeah. And tell me about Big Time as well. Because I find that that's super interesting as well. And by the way, I didn't know that you were involved in all these things at one time. It sort of like happened in sequence where I was telling you, Yu Ando is a friend of mine. I had him on the podcast recently, and I asked him how he was in the watch robe in Hong Kong. He mentioned Big Time. Then I realized Big Time is connected to you as well. And so it's kind of like I figured out just piece by piece that you're involved in all these things. But yeah, tell me about Big Time and sort of where that came about and what the type of work that you do there.
Okay. So basically, I took over Big Time about close to 5 years ago, right? So at the point of time, I was still running Feynman Timekeepers and also as an IT professional. So I was like juggling between my day job and doing design and the work for the watches after my office hours. So it came upon one day that I had this opportunity to take over Big Time Singapore. So Big Time Singapore is a watch distribution company, previously only based in Singapore. So we are actually the main distributor for Orient and Orient Star. And recent few years, we took on bigger brands like Seagull, Peacock, and all the other micro brands also. So we are not a retail, so we are mainly a distribution. So what we do is we look for shops which has potential to carry our brands, and then we kind of like introduce our brands to them and try to kind of promote, especially for micro brands, right? Because I think as I mentioned to you also, one of my kind of like wish is to help micro brands, because as a micro brand owner myself, I face all the difficulties and challenges, so I can really feel and understand how difficult it is to survive in this market, right? And how difficult it is to do marketing, especially for small brands like us, where we do not have big marketing budgets, right? So, so that's one of the objective that the first thing I want to do when I took over Big Time is to really help smaller brands to promote. So I'm always constantly like looking out for retail points which can help to carry the micro brands, and then I will try to introduce them to brands. So this is what I do mainly for distribution. So other than distributing my mainstream watches, which I also like. So now my main job is kind of like business development here. So basically what I do is I will look at day-to-day operations, and then after that I will look at how we can develop and grow the brands that are with us together. So that is the main things that I'm doing daily, apart from Sprang and Feynman Timekeepers.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say you're a busy guy. Well, there's so much that we could talk about here, but I don't want to hold you too long. This was really, really interesting, learning about everything from your collecting background to starting Feynman to the full collection and Sprung and Big Time. For those that are listening in here and interested in learning more about Feynman or Sprung, where are the best places for them to learn, and anything that's coming down the corner that we can be excited about? I know Sprung is coming later this year, but anything that you wanted to share that folks listening in or watching this can get excited about?
So like I mentioned, we are developing our new version of Iron 1. So the version 3 will be coming Hopefully by this year. Yeah, because I can't tell the exact things because there are some designs parts which I think can be improved. So I will try to still continue to improve whatever I can before I release it as a product. Right. There's the on the Feynman side, and also as usual we are launching our annual Zodiac series. So the year of the horse is this year. So we'll be launching a full enamel dial on the year of the horse. And then for Sprang, yes, we are coming this year in November. So the dates are more or less finalized to be 14 and 15 of November. So you will be able to see a lot more brands than last year, I feel. Yeah, because we have managed to acquire a bigger space this year round. So our main challenge for Sprang is just space. Because every year we are growing, right? And Singapore is a very small country. We don't really have big spaces to hold events, right? And the amount of big spaces is always in demand, right, for other events also. So we are happy to say that we have acquired a very nice space where we can accommodate more brands, and we are looking forward to having more people to join us this year.
Well, I hope to be there, and I hope to meet you in person and a lot of the other Singapore founders.
Just one more thing to add, maybe. Yeah. So we will be going to Chicago this month. Yeah, today is April. So this month we'll be going to Chicago to attend the Minutes and Hours Watch Fair. So if anyone is in Chicago, do come over and say hi to us. We are more than happy to talk to you. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I wish I could get to that one as well. So the next one that I'm going to is wind up here in San Francisco in my area. And then from there, um, maybe Sprung. I don't know. No, I hope to get some before then, but I think maybe that's where you and I will next connect. But again, as I was saying, I really appreciate you coming in. Such a fascinating story. And as I said, I always love hearing the story behind the watches, the inspiration. So thank you so much for being so open and sharing all of this with us. And, great job with all the stuff that you're doing in Singapore. As I said at the beginning, it looks like Singapore is really leading the way when it comes to microbrands. And it's clear that you've played a vital role in that, both as a brand owner and inspiring other brands, but also with your events and your distribution company, really supporting and helping others. So keep doing what you're doing, and we'll be cheering
Thank you so
along
much.
here from the States.